On some of the last pages of the monthly magazine for the PlayStation, you would always get a glimpse of some of the upcoming games that were to appear on the disc the following month. So it always gave you an incentive to want to purchase it so that you could get to play more really cool and unique games, even ones that you never would have seen or even experienced before. And that was the cool concept of these demos. I'll never forget when I did buy my first PlayStation demo. It definitely gave me an idea of what was possible with the PlayStation. I have actually done a previous video on the first demo I bought. I'll make sure to drop a link down in the description, where the games like Excalibur 2555 AD, Monster Truck Sports Challenge and Micro Machines V3. And this disc also offered up another 4 playable demos, and I do remember very well looking back on the magazine as I read it from cover to cover, and to even see the screenshots of the likes of Ridge Racer, and it gave you a hint that it was a sequel to Ridge Racer, which I had grown to love over the months of getting to play racing games on the PlayStation, and to get to play a new sequel was definitely an exciting time. I just remember reading the covers and reading the pages, and even though I probably must have read the pages about 100 times, as I would get so excited to see what was coming for the games for the next month. And I remember actually getting really excited just to get my hands on this next demo disc. So eventually when it did arrive, you had the likes of this game, Agent Armstrong, and you got access to play a lap of a race in Ridge Racer, and there was also another game called Little Big Adventure and another racing game called Speedster. Again, a lot of games on this disc, a lot of people probably didn't even know about them at the time, and the games in it, even though when you look at it now, even though some of these games didn't go on to be commercially successful, the likes of Ridge Racer definitely did, and the other 3 definitely have somewhat of a cult status, even though they wouldn't have been as well received. But the one thing I will say is that with the likes of even this game here in particular, Agent Armstrong, I actually loved playing the first level because I loved the style of the graphics. Even though the character himself was 2D, but the environments were more like 3D, and you had loads of different hidden areas and elements to explore. There was items that you could find in areas that you couldn't even see on the screen. You'd find like secret rooms and find new weapon upgrades or ammo, or even other materials that you could utilize like grenades or rockets and so forth. And then there was loads of platform elements as well, so it was pretty cool for the time. And I remember playing this demo to death as well, like even with the previous demo disc that I covered in my last video. I remember exploring for hours just to try and figure out to see what was there, even if you could even break it or find any glitches and so forth. So it was exactly the same with this demo, and this demo in itself was quite long. You definitely got to play through a good chunk of some of the levels in the game, even to a point that when you get to the end section you get to fight a boss for a short period of time. Now after a few attempts, I will admit I died a lot on this part, but I did manage to have a good go of it. But the thing is, you'll never really get to a point where you can actually finish him off, because the time will always run out just before you've actually gotten to that point. But it was a pretty cool experience all the same, and you definitely got your money's worth from just this demo alone, compared to even the other demos in the disc, but more so even with the likes of the action games, because Little Big Adventure was also the same. You also had one full level of the game to explore, and it in itself was quite long too, especially when you were first playing it, but after a few attempts you would get familiar with it. But I just remember going back and just being really excited to get access to the game to play it.
Rage Racer.
Well, what can I say about this demo? This demo was actually just iconic in every shape of the word. You got access to one of the cars in the game that you pretty much start off with, but it had some upgradable parts already added. Now you only got to do 1 lap in this race, but you got a direct feel for how this game was going to play out. And even though there was only just the 1 lap, I played this to death. because again I had become quite a big fan of the Ridge Racer franchise, so it was interesting to see how this would compare to the other games that I played. It was very different straight away compared to the previous games. The graphics were totally different. There were a lot more emphasis on the tracks and even the backgrounds. It was just an awful lot more detail in everything that was going on. It wasn't just about the cars on the track anymore, even though the graphics on the original games were quite good, but this here took it to a whole new level. But it still had the same feel and the control system was identical, although in some ways at the start it probably didn't feel as fast compared to the previous games, but you still got the same feel. But it still had the feel, but it still felt very different at the same time. Even with the sound of the cars as well, it just sounded very, very different compared to the games of old. But this was still a fun experience. I remember playing this to death to try and see if you could gain the rankings in the race. I think the furthest I ever got, I think I got into like second place I think once, but that was, of all the years I've been playing it, that's about the best I've been able to do. You'd never really be able to get a chance of actually winning. You'd actually get to a point where you could catch up to first place, but you would always cross the line before you got there. But this playthrough was relatively short for the most part, but it was very enjoyable. This racing game very quickly went on to be one of my all-time favourites on the PlayStation.
Okay, it's the last stretch. Keep it up.
Like with the previous games on the previous demo disc that I had played, this game was definitely very different. It definitely took quite a while to get used to the controls in this game, I will admit. I remember I must have spent nearly an hour trying to figure out how all of the buttons actually worked, because at the time, again, I was so used to playing 2D games, so to go into 3D, this was still kind of a new venture, and trying to figure out a lot of how games worked and even control back then, it was quite complicated for the most part. And this game was definitely more advanced in terms of the controls. It was definitely a lot more fiddly to get used to everything, because each button combination activated a different reaction, whether you wanted to fight, whether you wanted to sneak or run. So it definitely took quite a bit of getting used to, but it was very rewarding once you did get the hang of everything. But it's just everything was down to time, and you just had to make sure that you knew what buttons to press and how to be used to the environment, but not only that, how to use the interactions to your advantage so that you could get through certain areas. And even with this point, is you quickly figured out that you had to take out the guards to stop them from raising the alarm, because if not, you'd always get caught out and you'd have to restart the level again. And I'll be honest, that happened quite a few times. It was definitely a different style of game, because with the 3D graphics, but even in a kind of like isometric style view, it was definitely something that I wasn't really all that familiar with most games. Now, I had played some 2D versions of games back on the likes of the Sega Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo, but this was definitely a lot different to those type of games. And the fact is that there was a lot more combinations, as I mentioned, with the buttons, so trying to interact with everything, it definitely took some getting used to, because you'd be running into walls, you'd be running into areas, not knowing where you were going. It definitely took quite a few tries to figure out what to really do for the most part. But once you got a feel for it, it definitely was really, really good, and you would spend ages. I remember actually taking a demo down to one of my mates' house one weekend, and we sat and played this demo literally for the whole weekend. And this particular demo itself, myself and Mark, because he actually really liked it. And the thing is, we loved the exploration elements of it, because again, it was different, it was quirky, and there was something really unique about it. We just loved interacting with things. The fact is that you could dress up as one of the NPC characters and pretend like as if you're just normal, so that you could go around unnoticed and then even sneak around the place. But we'd be exploring to try and find any hidden items or secrets. Like when you interact with an object, you could get health, or you could find keys, or you could find other useful items to help you progress. So there was always like loads of little hidden like quirks and and tweaks everywhere. You just had to know kind of where to look, which was really cool. So I remember we spent hours just playing this, and then say the Ridge Racer demo, and I think even my mate Mark, he enjoyed this equally as much as I did for the most part. So it was quite fun to get used to. But as with a lot of these demos, that's the funny thing. Like, even going back to what I mentioned at the start of the video, when you were reading the magazines, you'd read it from cover to cover to try and see what was on the way next. Like, you'd no sooner gotten the demo disc and played through it that you were already excited to get the next month's demo into your hands so that you could play it also, just to see what games were on it. And it was an exciting time because it really opened up the doors of what was possible. But not only that, it completely made you aware of games that you never even thought existed. Like, for the most part, even though I was only just really getting into the PlayStation and I'd only been playing it a couple of months, but there was still a lot I had yet to see, and there was still a lot of games that I didn't even know was even there or had yet been released. So to get to play early versions of these games that were about to come out, or even games that had been out, was really, really cool. And you definitely got that ability to do so. And quite honestly, in my personal opinion, I'm sure you agree with this, playing the demos on the PlayStation 1 was definitely some of the best experiences you could have in games, because you would spend as much time and spend as many hours rummaging through and digging through the gameplay of the demos than you would playing the actual full versions of the games themselves, which was so much fun. And I remember even like going back and being at home, and not just with my mates but even my brothers, we'd all just gather around at the weekends or in the evenings after school, and we'd sit and we'd just play the demos just as much as we'd play any of the other games. That was the cool thing. And even at a time, because of the fact is we had a couple of demos and we were starting to collect demos before we really started to collect games, because we at this point we were still renting the PlayStation out at the weekends. I hadn't gotten my own PlayStation, I didn't get it till later on that year at Christmas. So what was happening was you were kind of building up a stockpile of resources that you could have, so that when you eventually did get your PlayStation that you had a load to play. And at the time, because you had limited pocket money, but all you could afford at the end of every month, when you did have a bit of pocket money, myself and my brothers used to bunch together and have enough money so that we could buy the monthly demo discs, because that's all we could really afford, because you couldn't afford to have enough money to buy a full game outright. Even if a game was only down to like £20 or something like that, you still didn't have that money. Whereas the magazines themselves used to be about between £6 and £7 at the time, but still it was a worthwhile investment considering what you got for your money. You got to read up a load about the different games that were available, but not only that, you got to explore some classic games and even some hidden gems, and this demo disc definitely had a few of them. Now I know there may be a lot of gamers out there that will remember some of these games and they may not have found them as good, but I'll be honest, I loved them. I really enjoyed playing them. But that's just the way I saw games back then. I always would be willing to give it the benefit of the doubt, and the very fact is, because the PlayStation and 3D gaming was totally new to me, I was just amazed by everything I saw. To me at that time, nothing looked bad. Even if a game that I personally didn't think that I would want to play, I still wanted to play it. I still tried to give it the time if I could understand it, and this was no different. So getting to play the demo discs for that period of time was just one of the most exciting times you could actually have playing video games. It really was, because you got to see so many new ones and you got to just see different things. But it was really just exciting to look forward to what was going to be available the next month, as you could always find hidden areas or items that you know that could help you leading into the full game whenever you decided to get it. So it was quite fun just to enjoy it for that alone. I remember Speedster being the last game on the disc to be played among all of the other titles involved, and straight away the one thing that struck me was the music in the game. It was kind of like a rock type of soundtrack, even though it was just the one track that played over and over, but it was really cool. And the fact is that you could gain access to at least 2 different vehicles, anything from like a Jeep to likes of even like a sports car or a Porsche 911. And it was really cool because even though the graphics were in 3D, but it was like a top down kind of almost old school Grand Theft Auto style racing game. It was quite fun, but it was very, very difficult, I will admit. There was definitely a lot to be aware of when you were playing this this game, because even on the easy modes this game can be very tough, because the handling can be very sensitive and twitchy, that you can nearly almost do a U-turn on the spot if you're not careful. So it definitely took quite a bit of getting used to. And you were able to change the camera angles, which was quite neat as well, so you could really zoom out or zoom in close enough to the car, but again you wouldn't be able to go really behind the car, you'd still be above the car, but you just got a view for the map and the overall camera. And the gameplay, it didn't seem overly fast for the time, but it felt cool once you got the feel for it. I think even the soundtrack really helped the overall look and feel of the game as well, because the music that was on the menu also played through into the actual gameplay itself, so it really got you like hyped to want to play it. And again, like Raid Racer, you only got to race in one lap on this here, but the game felt a lot longer, because the tracks in this game, for the most part, from having even played the full game a few years later, the laps are quite long, but then I suppose it's due to the overall speed of the cars themselves in the game. But in a lot of ways it was a nice way to round off the overall experience with the disc, because there are some really cool games on this. I know that a lot of people don't like them, but I really liked them, and this was just another proving point for me why the PlayStation was and still is my favourite console of all time, because you got to see so many unique and high quality games being made, some hidden gems, even games like I mentioned that probably aren't considered to be that good, but they still had enough unique elements around them that made them worth wanting to have a playthrough of them. So for that alone, getting access to the demos was really definitely one of the best ways to go, and I'll never forget that, even with the likes of looking forward to the magazines each month. And I will never forget reading over those pages and looking at the screenshots of each of the games that were coming the following month. And I remember looking at these screenshots for these games in this demo disc like there was no tomorrow. It just really got me excited for what was possible. There were just so many great memories to be had with playing the games on these demo discs, and I will be sharing a lot more of these memories in future videos, so make sure to keep an eye out for them. Because as we all know, the PlayStation 1 is home to some of the most iconic franchises ever in the history of video games, and these demos gave us a great way and a great avenue to be able to experience them for the first time. And I'm sure that you all have your own memories to share along the way, as I did, so it'd be great to hear other people's stories of these iconic demos.